Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now, this is a video that I've been trying to make for a minute now, and ever since the iPhone 10 came out, I've been so obsessed with it, and honestly, even 2 years later, this phone has held up probably more so now than ever before, and it's like one of the most timeless iPhones ever. Kind of flash forwarding back, if you guys remember, like with the iPhone 6s, I talked extensively about that phone. I'm like, dude, the 6s is like one of the best phones Apple ever made, and it was more so than just the way it looked or anything like that. At that time, it was more so what it brought. It brought Force Touch, it brought 2 gigabytes of RAM, basically twice the amount of RAM, and it was one of the fastest iPhones at the time, and even now still supported, still an amazing iPhone. And that phone is honestly one of the best phones ever in my opinion. But now the iPhone 10, I think, is that phone on the next level. Not only did it bring so much at the time, but the design was different, and even now it still holds up completely, and the iPhone 10 is going to hold up for so much longer. I mean, there's really not too much Apple can go, honestly, from this point on, besides removing the notch and everything in terms of a design standpoint, but I'm probably wrong. I feel like Apple's going to go the next level and do way crazier things, but with the iPhone 10, it's such an insane piece of technology, and I'm so glad that I got to own it as a main device, and then I got to reuse it again. But I kind of wanted to see how the iPhone 10 has held up throughout these last 2 years, do a later part of 2019 review about this iPhone and kind of talk about my experience with it, talk about, because I was just using this phone up until even 2 weeks ago when I went to reuse it. I eventually switched back to my 11 Pro, but honestly what I can tell you is the iPhone 10 is one of the greatest iPhones ever made and one of the greatest phones ever made. Now, looking on the front, there's a 5.8-inch Super Retina OLED display, and even though the 10s and the 11 Pros and all those phones have better screens, technically speaking, the iPhone 10, I honestly could never tell that big of a difference between them. I think that's all just propaganda speculated by, Apple and all these other people. In real world use, you will not tell that big of a difference. I think the 11 Pro can get a little bit brighter, but literally every single other direction, it's almost exactly the same in my opinion. But that screen has held up very well, and even kind of looking back, the iPhone 10 came out 2 years ago. I have very rarely ever seen people's iPhone 10s have screen burn-in, with phones like my Galaxy S8, my Galaxy S9s even so many phones I've owned in the past, and many other people's phones that I've bought used and everything, those have always had so much burn-in on those displays, and I've always wondered, what's the case? Why are all these screens so bad? But almost every time I look for an iPhone 10, it's like every single one of those don't have screen burn-in. When I'm looking for a Galaxy or something like that, I'm almost always expecting to get some type of burn-in on that display. When I'm buying it used, I'm expecting it to have burn-in. The iPhone 10 for the last 2 years has held up so well. The screens are almost immaculate, every single one I've owned, and now I'm sure there's some out there that have burn-in and everything, but the ones that I've owned were perfectly fine, and I'm so happy about that. Apple really took their time to make sure those were perfectly fine, and those, even though it's an OLED display, I haven't really seen any with burn-in, which I'm so happy to report. The build quality of this phone is still super premium. It feels just like a brand new phone every day I use it. On the back, you have glass back, wireless charging on it, no reverse wireless charging, but the 11 Pro doesn't have a reverse wireless charging either, so it doesn't really matter. Basically, the whole entire features of both those phones are extremely the same with the iPhone 10, and every single iPhone that's newer than the iPhone 10, the features are almost exactly the same. There's really nothing that the 11 Pro can do besides the camera that the 10 can't do, and even that, the camera is still really good on the iPhone 10 too, which I'll get into in a second. But that pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. It's still an amazing phone. Force Touch is still embedded in the display and is a very good phone in my opinion in terms of the outside. Now, in terms of the inside and even in terms of software, this thing was started with iOS 11.1.1. You are able to get iOS 13.2. We just got the 13.3 beta today. Now, one thing I will say is that, most people might think, oh, the iPhone 10 will stop a year before the 10s or whatever the case is. I can almost guarantee you right now, the iPhone 10 will last just as long, if not even longer than the iPhone 10s. There could be, some way that Apple could keep supporting the iPhone 10 up until even the 11 Pro's end date. But here's the reason I say that. It's because this phone started with iOS 11.1.1. It didn't start on exactly iOS 11, so it's not going to get that full support. Even if it lasts as long as the iPhone 8 did, that's still not going to be as long as something like an iPhone 11 Pro, or usually the long cycle that Apple supports their phones. That's not the standard one because it didn't start exactly on iOS 11. So in my opinion, Apple will probably keep it supported up until at least the iPhone 10s, maybe more, maybe the 10s and 10 and 11 Pro will get more software lifecycle support, I don't know, but I'm sure the iPhone 10 will last as long as the iPhone XS, so that's a huge plus. The software has been very, very good. The gestures are awesome. When it was first released, it had a couple problems, but Apple fixed those right away, and even now when there's like some RAM management issues and stuff, I never had those on my iPhone 10, and I didn't have those again when I reused it. People were still complaining about it though, which is perfectly fine, but so far what I can tell you is the iPhone 10 is perfectly fine in terms of software support. It's still going to be lasting for many, many more years. It's probably not even like done halfway with this life cycle, so that's a super awesome thing to report right there. Now in terms of performance, okay, this thing was released with the Apple A11 Bionic chip, a hexa-core CPU with 3GB of RAM. Really the only main difference we've seen in terms of performance, besides like the A13 and all those things, is the additional gigabyte of RAM, but it's really not that much. I mean, even if you have like 3 gigs, that's perfectly fine for an iOS device. This phone is still extremely fast in my opinion. When I was doing those iPhone 10s versus iPhone 11 Pros and 11s comparisons, I noticed that yes, the 11s, 11 Pros, 11 Pro Maxes are faster phones without a doubt, but you guys can see, dude, the iPhone 10 can still hold its own. It's still being, still a very fast device in my opinion. Yes, if you want to get the most performance and better performance, all that, go for the 11 Pro, go for the 11 Pro Max, but the iPhone 10 in my opinion, dude, it held up quite well in those comparisons. And when I was doing those, I wasn't expecting like these phones to be that big of a difference, and there really wasn't. It wasn't until I went for like the iPhone 7 versus the iPhone 11, that's when I started seeing the speed increase and everything. But the iPhone 10 is still a really good performing device. This thing is not slow at all. Every time I pick it up, it's done exactly what I wanted to do. With iOS 11, it wasn't really good on any device, but the iPhone 10 held it, pretty decent. iOS 12 was very good in my opinion, and iOS 13 has been pretty good as well. Better than iOS 11, but not as good as iOS 12, I think. But definitely, without a doubt, I can definitely tell you the iPhone 10 can still hold its own in performance, and I'm super happy about it without a doubt. So that kind of covers up the performance side of things. Let's go ahead and talk about the camera. And again, there really hasn't been too much development with the camera, if I'm being completely honest. It's still a tremendous camera without a doubt, but the iPhone 11 Pro does have some cool little advantages with it, which, is that additional ultra-wide sensor. The iPhone 10 doesn't have it. It still has a telephoto lens, which isn't that big of a deal, but it just depends how important that hardware is to you. The software is almost identical. With iOS 13.2, we've seen some additional things with the newer iPhones, with changing the camera resolutions and everything, but in terms of everything else, they're almost exactly the same. You have two 12-megapixel sensors on the iPhone 10. Obviously, no software updates or anything is going to change that, but the quality is still very good. You still have portrait mode, you still have all those different cool little things, and what I can tell you is the camera is still very good on the iPhone 10. I was taking pictures with it not too long ago, and I was like, wow, this quality is super good. Like, how much better can we get from here? And obviously with the iPhone 10, you're getting portrait mode, you're getting 4K at 60 frames, which is something that not even the Google Pixel 4 and 4 XL can do, which is so crazy. So I'll definitely tell you, in terms of the camera, it's held up so well. I mean, I'm not even just saying this because I used it every day when I used it all the time, but like this phone camera is still very good. So without a doubt, I'll definitely tell you that the camera has held up really, really well, and just as much as the body, in my opinion. We have a 7-megapixel front-facing camera. You can do 1080p videos, and it's a good camera at the end of the day. I'll definitely tell you, like I stated, the camera is still one of the biggest advantages for this phone without a doubt. So that's a really cool thing right there. Now moving on to the battery life side of things. This thing was released with a 2716 mAh battery, and really it's only gone down from there. That's at its full 100% capacity. But another thing that I want to hit on is that just as much as the screen, like I've very rarely ever seen OLED burn-in on an iPhone 10, I have very rarely ever seen the iPhone 10's battery life degrade super high. Like, it's never been below like 95% to 90%. Like, yes, 90% is usually not like the greatest, but it's still pretty decent. Most of them have been around that 95% range. I've owned probably like 4 or 5 iPhone 10s, believe it or not, since my first time I picked one up, and all of them have been around that range. Even my newest one has been like a couple months ago. And that's a huge thing. When you're buying a phone, you don't want it to buy it, and expect it just to replace the battery all the time. And my battery health has been pretty decent for all my iPhones, when I bought them straight up. They've degraded since then, obviously, I've used my phones pretty extensively, but what I can tell you is, in terms of battery life, it's not bad. It can definitely get you through a day. I personally picked up Apple's battery case. I felt like that was something I needed. You don't necessarily have to do that depending on your performance and like how much you use a phone and everything, but I think the battery life is a little bit above average. It's nothing like brag-worthy, and that is something that I wished Apple did fix, and they eventually did fix with like the newer iPhones and everything. So in terms of battery, that's probably one of the most average things about this phone, but that is something I wanted to hit on before I closed out this video. And to kind of sum up this whole entire thing, man, what I can tell you is the iPhone 10 is better now than when it was released in 2017. It's a tremendous phone. It's held up very well. The body is still almost exactly what we have nowadays. The build quality is amazing. You have IP certification. The screen is very good. And if you're buying it used, dude, they're like in such good condition that it's insane why you wouldn't pick one up. And I think I've seen these on Amazon for like less than $600, which is a humongous steal in my opinion. I would still rather have an iPhone 10 than an iPhone XR. And so what I can tell you is, in terms of everything about this phone, I love it. It's an amazing phone, a tremendous phone at that. And I think if you still have an iPhone 6 or 6S or iPhone 8 or whatever, I think that the time to pick up an iPhone 10 is better now than ever before. So that's kind of how I sum up this whole entire video. If you want to pick up an iPhone 10, I'll find the cheapest one on Amazon and I'll link it straight down in the description below so you guys can get it from there. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.